Hi, my name is Ken Lasseson. I've been running the CFS chronic fatigue syndrome remission website for the last 10 years and the Microbiome prescription site for the last 5 years. Today we're going to be looking at a CFS patient who has had chronic fatigue syndrome for 35 years. And it's an interesting case, and for some people it can be very beneficial to work through this analysis. Okay, so first I'm going to describe the patient in terms of factual information. Basically, a woman developing in '87, which puts about 35 years since onset, deals with Lyme and mold issues as in diagnosis. She has been put on 2 antibiotics, both of which has had adverse effect of her. She's also being prescribed iron supplements, and the iron supplements had also a adverse effect. At this point, I want to stop and speculate on what the iron could have done, which is very much related. We know from studies that the microbiome can determine whether or not a person is fat or thin. The classic example is studies with 2 sets of mice. One which are obese and one which are skinny. Both were maintained on the same food intake. In other words, same calories going in. What they ended up doing was transferring the microbiome from one to the other and the reverse. And the result was interesting. The weight gain happened. The skinny mouse became fat, same calories. The fat mouse became skinny, same calories. Which means that the bacteria in the gut determines weight gain, which is a different way of doing it. Which ones we are not absolutely sure of, but the fact that iron causes this change implies that iron may have caused some of the bacterial shifts towards the obese microbiome profile. Now, with gain of weight, we also know that insulin resistance is associated with that, as well as bloating, which is not unlikely. And similarly, high cortisol could easily be tied into that whole microbiome shift caused by the iron. Now, here's where you need to remember one thing. Iron causes it. Okay, stop it. Doesn't work like that. Once the bacteria gets established, it tends to be self-maintaining. So stopping the iron by itself is unlikely to suddenly reverse everything, because basically it's a catalyst for change. And once the change happens, removing the catalyst doesn't stop the change. The change is self-perpetuating until something else interferes with it. So that's one set of things which, looking at the description, comes to mind. Being on antifungal and antibacterial herbs for the past 3 years for mold and Lyme. History on and off of antibiotics for Lyme and co-infections for decades. In other words, guess what? Wherever she was at 87, her microbiome has been hammered here this way and that way, this way and that way, all over the place. Being living gluten-free for years, food poisoning 5 years ago, again another body slam of the microbiome interactions, which we don't know whether or not she fully recovered from the food poisoning. It's hard to tell. And feels low hypoxic, as low oxygen to the brain, which is common with chronic fatigue syndrome. There are several possible models for it. The one which applies to me is I have an inherited coagulation defect. It was detected by David Berg at the Chemex lab, which unfortunately are out of business now. And fortunately, it was one of these defects which I can control very easily with a drug called Parasidium, which is over the counter in most of Europe, but not in the US. So I had to do a bit of fun in getting hold of sufficient dosages of it. Other cases can be the metabolites being produced by the bacteria in the gut somehow impedes the oxygen delivery to the brain. Also, it could alter the size and shape of the blood vessel, the blood cells, which also will has implications for oxygen delivery. So there are many mechanisms, and there's not enough information to proceed down the track. Coagulation testing is what I would usually suggest, and it is detected mainly looking for inherited coagulation defect, although some can be obtained from the environment, epigenetic changes. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is go, because this person has said for 35 years, to take a look at what could be happening in terms of the microbiome. Before you have a simplified model of what is going on, and I view the process as something called a Markov cascade or Markov chain. And what happens is as follows. We have an active infection, Epstein-Barr, some other infection, COVID would be a more contemporary example. And the infection is there, and the person eventually recovers from the infection. The infection may be non-detectable, effectively gone, deemed to be successful treatment. However, what happens is we have residual bacterial shifts. After feeling sick, these impacts may cause people to feel tired for a week or two, or other things for it. So these are the residual shifts. After a certain number of days and weeks, the person may be fully recovered as back to their microbiome before the active infection happened. However, not everybody goes that direction. Some people goes down the alternative path, which is they end up with a stable initial dysfunction. In other words, getting back to your stable, healthy microbiome failed to happen. Instead, an alternative reality come into place. Often, once that happens, there will be a variety of treatment attempts, formal or informal, and that will often cause a new stable dysfunctional microbiome. And then usually by this point of time, the dysfunction is causing stress to happen in a person's life because they can't get back to work, they're feeling horrible, you name it, stress comes in, and we know stress causes microbiome changes. So we have one more stable dysfunction. Each one of these are slightly different, as you can see by the shape. So this has one corner missing, this is two corners missing, this things to shift, something comes back, something disappears. So basically each one is a difference from the last one. It's similar in some aspect, but it's also different. And it goes on and on and on until finally somebody is in their current state. For this person, we have had two antibiotics, we have had food poisoning, we have herbal antibiotics, which also do it. So we have a whole bunch of things here, and she's now in her current state, which will be very different from somebody who, let's say, just had a Epstein-Barr infection and dealing with the residue or even initial state. It's different, and that's why if you look at a whole collection of people with chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID, you find that the duration they have had has an impact on the microbiome pattern. And in some cases, greater diversity, other cases, less diversity. But it is the challenge of dealing with trying to treat it, because the microbiome dysfunction determines the symptoms and also impacts which treatment will be successful or not, or helpful or not. Now, we go on and we look at the recovery. Whatever the current state is, we try some modifications, and it results in the altered microbiome. It may take days or weeks for the impact to be done, and then we end up with a next stable dysfunctional one. In other words, once you put into place suggestions, I suggest 4 to 6 weeks before you retest to allow the microbiome to stabilize again. And you're at a different microbiome dysfunction, you do a treatment attempt again. It moves it along and along, and eventually the goal is to be fully recovered or as close to fully recovered as we are able to get it. My definition of fully recovered is if everything appears to be in the normal range for all your microbiome, then whatever is happening is probably the consequence of long-term dysfunction impacting other body systems. In other words, a system got starved too long and responded by shutting itself down or whatever. So that is the basic flow of onset, progression, finally get to a uncomfortable spot, and then the step-by-step progress of going for recovery. So now I'm going to walk through my preliminary analysis, which is recorded in the blog post. I'm going to also probably embellish comments which aren't in the blog post, because often as I walk through, additional things come in, or things come in which hard to write down in a blog post. So we log in, we go to the samples, and first thing we see is we have 5 sets of samples. Okay, now I'm walking through using the website, and first thing we do is we see we have 5 samples as described. And where we're going to start off is actual multiple sample compare, because we have multiple samples. And they have to all be in a reasonable period of each other. Actually, if I flip over here, you can see that they're all over a 6-month period, almost one a month. There was a break for a month, and then the latest sample. So we have all of those. We could go and look at the horribly massive, long details of every item, which you can do. But usually my preference is to go directly into Outliers. Let's go and take a look at the bacteria taxonomy outlier. And we have the list here, and what we are wanting to do is watch out for things that are solid blue all the way across or solid pink across. Those are things which are consistent issues. For example, here we have Fusobacteria, which is sitting always at an obscenely high amount from sample to sample, so we could mark that as something we want to add to handpicked bacteria. And we can go down, and everything here's something which is generally low, and we could add that to a handpicked bacteria, etc. So we could go through, and we see we have a fair number of items that are always high or always low. And here the blank indicates that it's not out of range. However, it could mean it's just barely scraped out of range. So if we want to be real picky, we go and examine the details. Here's something else which probably there was no value earlier. With no values, it simply puts a dash. Normal range, it puts a dash. And here we have it's present, but very low amounts. Getting down, and we go on, and we go on, and we go on, and we go on. And what you'll find in the example post is I sort of identified the key ones, and I summarize on the blog post. So you see the ones which are high, and we see the ones which are low. And one thing to call out of particular interest is we have Blatia producta high and Blatia ovinum low. Both belong in the same family of bacteria. One is high, one is low. It's only when you get down to the species level that you can see where the culprits are. So this one being low and this one being high is of interest. If you have to make a decision, always reduce the high ones. Trying to get the low ones up is a bit more complicated, because sometimes they are transitory in or out. And also you should be aware whether or not they are common. For example, if you click there for Blatia there, we go through, and what we find is it's a 95% of bottom site, so it's something which should be there at some degree. And or if we go to Producta and see what it does, we find it also there, not as often, but it's also there pretty common. So what we have is two bacteria which are normally there. One is very high, one is very low. Both are in the same family, which means sometimes we may not want to always do things at the highest level and make a judgment call. Sometimes seeing the details is important. Okay, so with that said, let's hop back. And we have all those lovely things. And now I'm going to flip over and look at the next set of outliers. And we basically should go through the whole process one by one and take a look at what the products are. Again, we have color coding. And as before, we have a massive number of items listed there. So, and some of the stuff is a little bit, okay, it gets very complicated fast. But what we can do is look at particular things. For example, let's go back and take a look at some of her issues. She mentioned knowing that she has some genetic issues with 3 particular items and also oxalates. So what we can do is search for these keywords in that long list of stuff to see whether or not some of the issues and the bacteria are interacting. Okay, so with that said, let's get back to the report. So we are looking at the page search for lysine. So if every time lysine is mentioned, you see we have low values there, more low values, more low values, low values, low values, low values, low values, low values. In other words, what we find is apparent confirmation of the genetic issue with lysine, which may well cascade into the bacteria which has interaction with lysine. Remember that the body's DNA and the microbiome interplay with each other. If there's a problem with lysine, as in not able to process it, then what happens is the bacteria producing it will get signals to shut down because the available levels floating around are over a threshold. And with that shutdown, it means that certain bacteria are going to naturally disappear because they've been basically told to shut down, not become prolific. We've got enough stuff, don't do any more. So for lysine, we have what appears to be a pretty solid match there. And there were 20 of them, and every single one, with one exception, there. So we have, we had 19 out of the 20 cases where lysine is involved. We have very low values, which means that that lysine issue is probably impacting the bacteria distribution or growth, which makes life complicated. At least we got some understanding of what the consequences of having a lysine. Now we have another metabolite or chemical which is there, and we can see if we can find any, and there's absolutely none there. This one, but we have 2 more pages to go through. And let's try the last one of the thing. Nope. So for one of the 3 items she has trouble processing, we found the bacteria which are associated with it are all at low levels, which implies that the problem processing is cascading back into the microbiome bacteria, which makes it a little bit of a challenge in terms of doing it because you're having to deal with DNA. Let's go back and look at the next one, the enzyme outliers. And we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to go and see, nope, first one we don't find anything. We're not going to go and see if the second one item cited is involved anywhere in there by name. And then again, we have one, oh, that's the ISO, which may be the same. I'll leave the chemists to argue about that one. And what we have here is an interesting situation. We have one enzyme set, which is showing a high amount, but the flip side is the next one. We also have a low amount, and that high amount seems to have disappeared. That is the, okay, let's show you. If I click View to cake, and there we get the enzyme, and what we want to do is go down and take a look at two words, substrate and product. Substrate is what is fed into the enzyme, in other words, this consumes this, and what does it produce? And that is what it produces. NADH, which is generally significant for chronic fatigue syndrome, is one of the products. Then ammonia, etc. So that's what you can go from the enzyme directly to what it consumes, or what it uses as food, and what does it puts out as product. Okay, so we have that, and the other one we could, so that's the one which is a high producer. And similarly, we can do this one and this one. We see it's again, it's a consumer and what it puts out, which are a whole bunch of biochemical terms, and I will not attempt to explain them to you. If you're interested, because some reading to do. Okay, so we have a second one there, and let's go back to what we found on the first one, which is lysine, and see if it comes involved in any of the enzymes. We have a total of 9. We have low, 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 clicking through, another low, another low, another low, another low, another low, and we have one where it was high for a short while. And let's see if we can get any more information about that. And for this one, it consumes a particular form of lysine and produces several stuff from it. Okay, returning to the compare samples, we're now going to do the cake modules outliers. And again, we could do a review report, and we can scan down on a lot of stuff. You see a lot of pink, which means not that much is being produced. We have a shorter list, and choose anything that is high. Okay. So we do have rather high level of that. Let's see if that takes us somewhere useful. Okay, gives us the information there, which doesn't particularly help us for a quick analysis. Okay, so the lactam resistant, I believe, is a antibiotic resistant component, and the fact that you were quite high implies that you may have developed some antibiotic resistance to the beta-lactam. Anything else? Or one more pink. Again, some of these I do not know off the top of my head what the impact is. Some I just recognize the name. So we have another stack here. Nothing which particularly stands out as explanatory. And we're going to go back and we're going to first look at medical Okay, let's look at end products outliers, just out of curiosity. We haven't done that one, or did we? Okay, and again, in general, we have basically everything is low. We have a couple things high. The bacterioracin is a type of natural antibiotic, so we had those high. Again, just and the prior chart where the beta whatever, which I suggest could be antibiotic resistant thing, all seem to occur about the same time. But in general, we have low. So things like vitamin D would be suggested, although it's only for those periods. DAO, again, is low. Everything there. So at this point in time, one may want to go back and actually take a look at the actual end products to see what the trend is. And here we have, although it dropped down, build up, down. So that I believe is available as a supplement. I need to double check that. I haven't had to use it. We have another one here which is low and with no measurement, and low. So that's across the board. Sulfide is never low, which is produced by certain bacteria. Again, there, most of the, D-lactate is low, which usually is a good sign because D-lactic acid is a common cause for cognitive issues with chronic fatigue syndrome. However, we do know there may be cognitive issues with this person because of coagulation, because of insufficient protein S. Okay, here we have tryptophan is too high and it's still sitting high. So that would be one item of concern. Make sure you don't take that as a supplement. And valeric acid, again, that went down and then back up, so it's not particularly a concern. And we can go through, and gluten consumer, you are low. But then again, that is exactly what you would expect if you are gluten-free, because the bacteria which consumes gluten are not going to be fed. So in terms of gluten-free, yes, her gluten-free diet is reflecting in the absence of gluten consumers. Absolutely logical. Vitamin D is low, 51, 63, 53, and then missing, so it's gone again. Question would be for the person is, did he start taking vitamin D supplements and then stop or whatever? It's hard to say. DAO is in general low. The threshold is very low for it, but the question is, since histamine issues are common with chronic fatigue syndrome, just trying one bottle of DAO as a supplement and seeing if it has any significant effect may be a worthwhile experiment. Just one bottle and see if it does have effect, mainly because the person is consistently low on DAO, which reduces histamine. Well, actually, to be more precise, it is similar to insulin, as in it's a natural substance that handles, in this case, histamines instead of sugars. And this last one, if I remember right, is a female hormone. Given that the person is a woman in her late 60s, I don't deem it to be surprising that relative to young females, she's low in it, because this particular enzyme or hormone is not as relevant to her. Okay, so that takes us through discovery of what is going on. Next, we're going to wander over to trying to get suggestions for what the person should take or try to take. And remember, these are not predictions of things that will help you. These are lists of items which by modeling infers there's a higher probability of them being of benefit to you rather than having adverse or neutral reaction. So all it is improved odds. That's all we can do. We don't have enough information to go beyond that. So let's go on and hop back to the samples. So I'm going to take her last sample, which is the 5th of May this year. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take AI suggested probiotics. To remind people, these are based on finding out where somebody is low on particular enzymes and seeing if there are probiotics available that produces those same enzymes. In other words, you're doing a bioactive supplement. Commonly, you're low on vitamin D, you take vitamin D. These enzymes we can't get in capsule form. What we can do is get an organism that produces them and consume them, bioactive supplements. So let's go and see what comes up here. So explanation up above. And the first thing that strikes me hard or surprising is how high these numbers are. Often they are 10 or 20, occasionally up to 100. In this case, we have 1,200. We have a massive number of things which this particular probiotic provides, which isn't being produced elsewhere. So we have some explicit things. We have listed there by value. And what I'm going to do is actually point out that the one I would be tending to go towards would be muraricin, Enterococcus faecium, and Streptococcus fermentis. I indicated both of those, and the reason I inclined to go for them is because they are all sweetly available. By sweetly available, I mean the following. One is they are available as an absolutely explicit probiotic. This probiotic has one thing and one thing in it only. So you don't have to worry about adverse side effects from other probiotics. Item number 2 is each one of these are researched. And actually, let's go over and take a look at that. And look up research retail probiotic strains. So we have here a list of everything and what has been researched. For example, if I go down and we have 2 of them researched. One is in AOO probiotic free, and that one is in muraricin. And over here we have the amount of research that it is. So we can either click here or we can click there. And we now have a list of all of the research on that specific probiotic. So if you want to read more about the probiotic and what the probiotic you are taking will actually do, you have it. You have it nicely, easy to find, easy to document. So that was one of them. Now let's go through, and Streptococcus fermentis is here, and Custom Probiotics provides it. And it provides as a single strain, and sweeter still, it's provided with no additives. It's just pure the bacteria. And the last one which we were doing was there's 2 of them. One is symbol 41, which contains the Enterococcus, and the other one was right, biofluorine here, or faecium is this Japanese one or this one. The bioflora has 13 studies. That one only has one. Again, if you want to read what it does, we can go over and take a read down. And again, you are now dealing with strain-specific research for a strain which you can buy retail, which means there's no maybe or maybe not. You have some concrete tested information on what its impact will be, which is why I always advocate going through researched single strain probiotics so you have the best control over what the impacts are. Okay, so let's get back, and there we have that list covered. Now let's go back to our samples. And next we're going to look at AI suggested supplements. And we have a relatively big list. And why do we have a big list? Because so much of the bacteria is low or just whacked. And all of these items are things which I found are available somewhere in the world as a direct supplement. Finding it is another problem depending on what country you're in, but they are available. And this is less than 10%. You could go and say, okay, let's just take the most extreme, and we get a good list at 3%. Let's choose to 1%. So we have 2 items of 1%. Again, the cutoff point is arbitrary up to the person. There's no magic mathematics they can do for that one. That's basically it. So I have go and put into the blog post what my net suggestions are of things to do. Okay, now this person is wanting, or she looked at the result, and there's one, the Fusobacterium, which she is particularly interested in reducing. So we could do several things. We could go over and look up bacteria. And okay, hopefully the right one. And we can go down, and at the very bottom we have a list of things which are impacting it. And so what we do see is it increases it here, and which is a sort of nice double find. This particular one which we got being suggested by the KEG enzyme-based probiotic suggestion is something which also happens to decrease the one she's concerned with. So it's a, wait a minute, 2 different ways of approaching the problem, same answer. So, which is sort of good. And the other things we notice is a lot of beta glucan. Now, and I'm going to hop back because unfortunately or fortunately, we have the joy of having and correcting for the specific bacteria she was doing. If you go down, you will see a list of things that modify. 1,267 different things modify it, raising it or lowering it. Okay, now, if I type in antibiotic, here, the list automatically gets adjusted, and we have 103 different antibiotics which are potentially impacted. And if I click here, it's in decreasing order, and basically every single one decreases it. So any one of 103 different antibiotics will decrease it. But here is where there's a problem. The problem is we have a large number of bacteria which are out of whack. Will, as a side effect, this antibiotic also have inadvertent negative results across the whole microbiome, making the person potentially worse. Think of it this way. You are a cop going in and you trying to stop a bank robber. You have your 357 Magnum. You come in, and the bank robber refuses to, you aim, you shoot one deceased bank robber. Nice and simple. That is what you would ideally like for antibiotic. Hit explicitly that one particular item. Phages are a way of doing it. Unfortunately, very few phages are available, and most of them are for a very small group of bacteria, as well as being hard to find, expensive, and usually being developed and sold from the Ukraine, which enters nightmares with customs on occasion. Or you can go conventional antibiotics, which means this cop comes in, not with 357 Magnum like Dirty Harry, but comes in with a sawed-off shotgun loaded with a large shell loaded with nasty stuff, and opens fire. Yes, the bad guy is going to get eliminated, but in the spread, 10, 20, 30, 40 other innocent victims are going to be impacted. And you're going to have a mess to clean up. And thousands of paperwork. But that's the problem with antibiotics. They can cause inadvertent side effects. So that is sort of one way of going, is saying, okay, we know what bacteria we want. Let's go and find which bacteria does it. Oh, there's just 100 of them. Which one? How to pick out 100? Well, often it's whatever the doctor is most familiar with, or whatever is in the standard medical care, or whatever. However, if you go back and we go back to the same sample and go to advanced suggestions, and what we're going to do is over here on there, we're going to mark antibiotics. So the only thing we are doing is antibiotics. And now what we're going to do is, well, we could do it. Let's do genus, species, and below. And we're going to show suggestions Newman. And I'm going to click this one here because it was going to show you something. Shows link to studies, and we don't need commercial probiotics here, so we'll unclick that one. So we could show links to studies for suggestion, and the reason I'm doing that is that it will help explain the problems which you may encounter. So here we have this antibiotics. Let's go to the first one. She's being honest. She has adverse effects from it, so she's not going to be likely to do it. Let's go over and take a look. So here is what it does, and we don't see any of the Fusobacterium on the list, so it has no impact on it. Zippo. So in other words, it's not going to do anything with that particular thing. If the doctor said it did, ask them for the evidence. Is unlikely there is. Let's go to the next one, which is tetracycline antibiotics. And we go down here, and nope, we have absolutely no hit. It affects other things, like the Fusobacterium is increasing, which is something which actually we want to have happen. And so that's basically so far for that one. Let's try the next one. Oops. It does decrease it. So we have one which I would describe as being a sweet one, because it decreases or is recorded to only decrease this one particular bacteria out of all the things we're trying to modify. Again, it may not be correct totally because we don't have information on whether or not the same thing impacts other things. But we do find that it is there. We have the study here, and we can go over and look at the publication, download the article, or go to the publisher link for it. So we can go and verify it. So that is one nice thing which we found. And we go down the floor. Okay, let's try the next one. Again, it actually comes from the same study. So another one which is a candidate. And fluorocleaning is something which Cecile Zardine uses, which I have taken myself for treating chronic fatigue syndrome. So it's sort of familiar. Other thing is tetracycline is also in the same thing. So we have some of the same things which are common for some physicians' treatment of chronic fatigue. Let's take a look at the next one. Next one illustrates the issue. The issue is we want to decrease that one, but Pediococcus, we are too high. So this has the adverse effect. It's going to increase one thing which we want to actually lower and decrease something else we want to lower. Now, in terms of the weighing here, which is why it made it on the list, is we factor in how many bacteria are involved in each group. How many bacteria do you want to change? How many bacteria do you want to change? So we use that to give a weighing for how important one is for the other, which is why usually you want high numbers, because generally it means you're doing the best you can. Here we have a case where it's a little bit dicey between the two. We do have things like oregano, which is the again, it's a good choice. It does go and reduce this one and doesn't seem to impact anything else that we have had researched. And oregano showed up in that list because of a coding error, but that's fine. Nicotine, lauric acid, amoxicillin is barely there. And if you take a look at amoxicillin, you see it has a whole bunch of different impacts, some of which are probably favorable and others are unfavorable. Hence, you end up with a low net value because it's when you are weighing between what you want to decrease and what you want to increase, and the numbers in each one, it barely makes it on the list. So that is my sort of dialogue about picking an antibiotic. What you want to do is go through, look at the citations, and from those, hopefully make a reasonable choice on there. Now, I should point out that that is by if I go up a layer so that we are dealing with higher hierarchies and do it, we will get a different ranking. For example, this one, which was down the list, is now a higher priority. And you can go up and down the list. There will be a commonality between them, but because of how we are calculating the weights, things are different. For the other one, we only had these two. Because we jacked up the level, we also have additional reference. In this case, it was to its parent is being referenced, and in some sense we are double counting it because it's not just the species, but it's also the parent unit which we want to do it. And we could in fact go further up one more just to illustrate the sensitivity of it. So we can do order family class. So we're going up 1 degree more. And we have things that are similar still. Actually very similar. And then we can go back one more. And there, notice that this is a complete list of things to do. And over here we have the list of things to avoid. And we asked for a 20, and 20. We didn't get 20. We have less than 20, which means we ran out of stuff. Over here, boy, the list will probably go on and on and on of antibiotics to avoid. In other words, most antibiotics are a no-no. And the ones that are probable to cause some positive effects are here. But yeah, but there's a little bit of caution should be taken because of the adverse reaction before for antibiotics. Whether or not adverse is Herxheimer reaction, which is die-off, or other things, it becomes messy. And there's no easy way to answer that question. So returning back to the samples. Actually, I don't need to go back to the samples. I just need to go back to this page. And what I'm going to do is I can untick that, and then I'm going to go and tick most of the other things on the list. Herbs, spices, miscellaneous, food additives, and all things not classified. Prebiotics, prescription drugs, I'll skip for the moment. I tried it earlier with no significant effects. Sugars and similar vitamins there. So we have everything there. And let's go back to our family, genus, species level, which seems to be a very stable one, at least for antibiotics it was. And now we proceed to do it. And now we have the suggestions coming up of things to try. Resistant starch is number one. The person had tried resistant starch, and I actually should point out a couple of things about resistant starch, which often gets missed. The thing that gets missed is that resistant starch is temperature sensitive, very temperature sensitive. Here is a simple example. We have oats flaked cooked. 0.03 is how much resistant starch in it. Uncooked is 7.7. By the process of cooking, the resistant starch is broken down by the heat. And voila. I do eat flake oats, but what I do for flake oats is usually I warm up water in a kettle to about 120, 130, pour it on my flake oats, let it soak for a while, and then eat it. They're a little bit raw, if you know, but they also maintain a reasonable high level of resistant starch. What I have included is a link to an actual download of a document which should be really informative because it has tables after tables after tables of how much resistant starch is on different types of food according to how you prepared it. Which means you can now go and say, okay, how much resistant starch are you getting more accurately? Often people will say, oh, resistant starch, you want potatoes. No. And you actually have a problem here. Cooked potatoes tend to have most of the resistant starch disappear. It's the raw potato which is high in resistant starch, just like the oats rolled uncooked is high in resistant starch. So you got to deal with trying to avoid heat being applied to things that are resistant starch. Could be a bit of a challenge for some people. It's another dimension to consider. Okay, now to return back to our suggestion page, we have things like soy, pectin, etc. Now remember I turned on show me the citation option, which is sitting here. So if I click here, and we can now see what the impact of the soy will be. And main of the impact of the soy is increasing the one bacteria. There's lots of studies repeating the research, and the more studies, the more credibility we give to it. Reason? Sometimes study A shows one thing, study B shows a different, and the fact that more and more shows the same thing indicates it should have a higher value, because we're trying to estimate the likelihood of it helping. And the more studies saying it helps or shifts a certain way, the more likely it is. So that's why we have soy there. Pectin. Let's take a look at pectin. Pectin is an apple. My wife eats tons of apples every shopping day. 3 big bags of apples, and she's very specific as to which species. Only the species that are high in pectin. And so there we have what impacts pectin. Again, this one is increased again, and very similar to what soy does. So in some ways this can help, because by comparing to find out which ones are impacted, you've got soy and you have pectin, and both of them impact the same bacteria in a similar way, which means you really don't need to take both of them. You can do whichever one you have the greatest preference for. And we have, let's try that one. And here we have we do have a problem here. This one increases Blattaria producta, which is one of those which are high. And so it helps a whole bunch of things, but it also doesn't help some other things. So, and everything else is things that are covered in the other one. It increases 2 of them, but we're trying to take one down and one up, so becomes a bit of a problem. Information is there far as we know, but we don't have a clean resolution. Xylan decreases food spec. Perfect. So therefore, you really want to increase that one. Increases that one. And that one is similar to everyone, except it's explicit for reducing one of the bacteria which she is concerned about doing. We can go over to cacao, and cacao goes through and lists things, and a large number of them are returning the same thing. Again, we work on what is researched. When we have bacteria in there which we have nothing about, in which case there's nothing we can do about it. Let's go over to human milk. And so we have all its impact, and we notice it says increase, up the top it says decrease. Again, it's one of these studies contradict each other, and you can go in and take a look. And if you want to, you can go and read the studies and try figuring out which one gives you more credibility or whatever. The information is there. The final decision should lie with your keyword, your medical professional. All I'm doing is giving the information. Broad beans is cyber-resistant starch. And again, it increases the same key ones as before. So we can go on there, and if you want to, and take a look over things like, for example, melatonin, which you may well be taking for sleep issues. And what does it do? It goes and this is everything that you have which it impacts, and you have to check the original list to see whether or not these impacts are desirable or not. The fact that it's a full one means that chances are every single shift is in the wrong direction. Okay, so we've gone through here. I also went through and handpicked bacteria and did the same thing. List was very similar, so I'm not going to bore you with that. Again, you got different ways of doing it. So, okay, at this point of time, I should point out that most of the V vitamins are there, which is interesting because generally with chronic fatigue syndrome, V vitamins are what are allocated. Now, the catch is the constant use of the B vitamins may well have resulted in the microbiome shifts going in the wrong direction or down its own unique pathway. So that's something to keep saying. We have NAC, melatonin, luteolin. Now, for example, luteolin is, okay, what is that? That's a flavonoid. Okay, but translate that into plain people list. And to go over here, and you have what decreases it or what its impacts, but more importantly, you have here what it is in. So you want to avoid these spices, olives, and then we get down into lemons to be avoided, etc. So those are things which are inferred by trying to avoid the usual. Okay, so again, everything is how shall I say, hyperlink. We go over here, and again, you can just cascade through. Oops. In other words, we have no information about the food it has. Is what does indicates that it does thing. Notice that it impacts 805 bacteria. Some of those are those on the list. And if we actually go over and where were we? This one. I look at the citation. Here is the 17 citations of what it does or what it does, which often is not necessarily desirable. This one is desirable, but it also decreases other things which are not desirable, like Roseburia. So that's basically underneath the cover showing you why things are selected. And remember, it's not just a positive or negative increase. It's factor into it is how much you want to increase or not. And for lack of any better solution, we base it on the difference between what the values are and what the normal range is. So it is a bit more complicated, but you've got the raw information there. And if you really want to, you can go and apply your own algorithms. Okay. I think it's about time for me to stop talking. Supper's coming from what I can hear in every room. Hopping back to the blog. Again, these are suggestions. They come from theoretical model, not practical experience, not clinical. I'm not a medical professional. These should be discussed with your medical professional and perhaps give them a dog and pony show for how they are being done. My initial suggestion, given how many shifts and cascades that this person probably has gone through for 35 years, is try to reduce or eliminate any supplements not on the lists. Basically, in some ways, we want almost a washout period to allow the microbiome to somewhat recover. Then shift over to the diet and supplements listed above, with the few probiotics being suggested. One of the things on the list is, which I like to suggest, is the Triphala, which is one of my favorite herbs. It's very much holistic. It's Ayurveda supplement, which has been documented to be extremely effective. It, in many ways, it is deemed to be as effective as an antibiotic for many conditions, and it was suggested. So the antibiotic you're suggesting is Triphala, is what I would suggest as an antibiotic herb, and start with it and then slowly increase it, ideally up to between 2 and 8 grams a day. We buy our own Triphala as organic certified bulk powder in 1 pound or 1 kilogram loads. Keeps the price down to about $20 for a tremendous amount of capsules, and make our own capsules. The base of the dosage is here, which comes out of clinical studies, and the dosage is used here, or in this case, an actual study, and the dosage was up to 9 grams a day or 9,000 milligrams. So, where possible, and wherever you see let's go back. Where you see the measuring stick here, you will find information about dosage based on clinical studies which are being done or clinical studies in progress. In other words, the purpose is to give you what some MD somewhere in the world has deemed to be a safe therapeutic dosage for purposes of clinical research. It gives a link to the source of the information so you can go and read the primary thing, which is probably a key factor for your medical professional to do. They like to know exactly where the information is coming from. It's not internet hearsay. That's what the site is trying to absolutely minimize. No internet hearsay, strictly fact, going to studies done by professional MDs or researchers, etc. So, with that said, let me think. So I mentioned, okay, the B vitamins, etc., are to be doing vitamin A, probably not. Omega-3 fatty acid, again, not. Many of these are the standard things you are recommended to do for chronic fatigue syndrome. But it appears that you may have done it too well, because it would look like all these things have actually shifted you not from healthy to the initial stable, dysfunctional, but has actually shoved you way to the other side, which makes it fun trying to get back to normal healthy. Okay, I'm going to shut up and go and have some food.